recognizes the need for more training on research about how children learn to read. And we really intentionally have designed Read Vermont with input from the field. So through the Literacy Advisory Council, through engagement with the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association and educators. So I also just want to acknowledge and start off by saying that we understand that it is hard to implement changes to instructional practices, and we're here to provide support. We will today, throughout our time together, I want to just start off by extending a big thank you to many of our special guests who are on the call today, and we'll introduce later as well. But we have Gwen Carmoli with the Colchester, who is the Colchester Curriculum Director and Chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy and President of the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association, and Deborah Gardner-Bosch from Mill River Unified Union School District, where she is the Literacy and MTSS Coordinator. I'm also really proud of the team at the agency. I'm proud to work alongside the team at the agency in designing this initiative. So a special call out to Emily Loita, who is on the call here today and really has been instrumental in designing this work. She's the ELA content specialist and a core part of the Read Vermont work. And then I also will introduce myself. So I am Emily Lesh, and I am leading the Read Vermont work at the agency, along with a large team of folks across the agency, because we know that this work will require all hands on deck, and that's something that at the agency we are working to prioritize. So without further ado, I am going to share my screen and walk through a few other items here. I see that it is coming onto screen. Okay, I think that we have it. Could someone just give me a thumbs up? You can see,
You're good, Emily.
the slides. Excellent. Thanks so much, Emily. Okay, great. So a few housekeeping items before we dig in further. So we're so thrilled, as we've said, with the high interest and high number of participants. To ensure that things continue to run smoothly today, I do want to go over a few quick housekeeping items to make sure that we're set up for a successful webinar. So we will keep all participants muted throughout the webinar. We are recording the webinar and we'll have closed captions. We will share it with all participants afterwards as well, along with an overview document getting to questions that folks may have. So please do use the chat for questions. We are going to do our best to keep track of questions. Emily Loita here is going to really moderate the chat, and also we'll have 10 minutes or so at the end to answer questions, and those that are particularly rising to the top of having the most questions. So now we get into the fun part. So the big why. I love to start with the big why. And the big why is our students and our educators. And our vision for Vermont is that we have thriving students with 21st century skills that are actively participating in their local communities and leading fulfilling lives, and have choices for what that looks like for them. We know that teaching students foundational literacy skills are critical building blocks for life. And so I really like to start with centering the students and the educators in this work. Read Vermont at its core aims to ensure that every child can read by 3rd grade, while also supporting struggling adolescent readers and preparing all Vermont students for college, career, and what comes next in their lives after K through 12. So we've gotten to this moment through we've built up to this moment over several decades, really. And there are many drivers that have really come together to inform Read Vermont. So Read Vermont is a comprehensive effort focused on aligning efforts to improve literacy outcome. So as you can see on this slide, over the last decade, there's been an increased focus on improving literacy outcomes in Vermont. In 2021, the legislature passed Act 28, which many of you have been actively involved in. And that resulted in the formation of a statewide literacy advisory council, as well as the creation of online asynchronous modules focused on the science of reading. At the end of the last legislative session, so the 23-24 session, the legislature passed Act 139, which is the most comprehensive literacy legislation to date. And really focuses on supporting Vermont's young readers through evidence-based literacy instruction. And this legislation represents a big opportunity as well as a big shift for Vermont educators and students that we know many folks across the state are already engaged in. And so Read Vermont is AOE's comprehensive effort to support education leaders in strengthening students' literacy skills and teaching all students the foundational skills to learn to read, and ensuring that they're really set up for lifelong success. So there are a few key findings that inform Act 139, and this language is pulled directly from Act 139. And the Advisory Council on Literacy found that explicit and systematic instruction on code-based and comprehension-based reading skills and needs-based support are the most effective literacy practices for the early grades. It also noted a strong focus needed on phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension for all students, and all needs-based tiers and layers are really critical for struggling learners. So reading instruction is interwoven into the principles of creating culturally responsive and inclusive environments for all students. So getting into some of the specifics here, Act 139, the Act 139 findings really are informed by the evidence base, and which is often referred to as the science of reading. And it's also modeled after legislation from other states. We're going to walk through a bit more about the science of reading in a bit and hear a perspective from the field later in the hour about the science of reading. But first, let's just spend a few minutes on Act 139 a little bit further and getting into some of the details. As I know, and we all at the agency have been receiving many questions, and we know that there's high interest. And so this Act 139 really calls on all of us. And yes, this also, in all of us, I also mean us at the Agency of Education, as well as those in the field, to make some shifts, as we have said. The purpose of today is really to focus on how we can do this work together and our role at the AOE in providing support and leadership to the field as you embark on this shift. So really specifically, I want to call out, which we have talked about, that Act 139 is informed by the research, that it does call on schools to screen all students in kindergarten through third grade, and also provide intervention for students that are not meeting benchmarks. It calls on all educators to have literacy professional learning, and included in that is professional learning on assessment and screening and intervention. It also tasks the AOE for providing recommendations to the Standards Board for professional educators on how to strengthen educator prep programs, teaching of evidence-based literacy practices. There were some key revisions to Statute 2903, which is a part of Title 16. And these revisions really focus on ensuring that all students learn to read by 3rd grade, and specifically states that all students need to receive systematic and explicit evidence-based reading instruction in the early grades from a teacher who is skilled in teaching the foundational components of reading, which includes phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension. It also continues and expands the Advisory Council on Literacy, includes some capacity building at the agency through a staff person. Also calls on the Department of Libraries to recommend opportunities for expanding access to early childhood literacy resources with a focus on low-income or underserved parts of the state. So we will get more into Act 139 in a webinar on October 8th at 3:30. We'll have details on that at the end of the presentation. But I do want to acknowledge that we know this today is really designed to provide that broad overview. And we will get into more details, as well as details on how we will support you. So with that, before we get more into what Read Vermont is, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Emily Loita, who is going to introduce our guest and Literacy Advisory Council Chair, Gwen Carmoli. So Emily.
Thank you, Emily. And if you could, while I'm doing this, send a link to the webinar to Zoe. She has a different one, unfortunately. And I was just asked for that. So let me see. As an agency, we've reflected on the recommendations from the Literacy Advisory Council, and we've asked Gwen to come and share some insights from working with the council, as well as some of the council's key priorities for successful literacy instruction and intervention. So Gwen, I'm going to turn that over to you now.
Good morning. Thank you so much. Thank you, amazing colleagues and literacy community. It's really nice to have so many people joining us for coffee and conversations this morning. This is a topic near and dear to my heart for sure. As an educator, I started as a paraprofessional supporting struggling learners, and have worked with that in mind every day as I've worked as a teacher, a literacy specialist, and as a curriculum director. I serve as the chair of the Advisory Council on Literacy. It was started in 2021. It was our very first meeting, and I was nominated and honored to be selected by the council. And then most recently, Act 139 continued the council, which continued the work that we started in Act 28. So I am really pleased to be in this capacity and to be keeping our students in mind. One of the most important things that we did at the beginning was clarify that we were not just talking about struggling learners, we were talking about all learners. Every learner needs to be feeling proficient and confident as a reader. Everyone deserved high quality and evidence-based instruction, and so we worked really hard on that. You can go ahead and move to our first slide if you'd like. The Advisory Council has a focus on increasing literacy achievement and really closing those achievement gaps for all Vermont students. And we represent organizations across the state, these statewide organizations, the School Board Association, the Agency of Education, the Superintendent's Association, the independent schools, the Special Education Council, the Vermont NEA, our teachers, our VITCLA, our Vermont curriculum leaders, our library association. We have community members who have expertise in literacy and advocacy for the struggling readers. And we've recently added the higher education community. One member just joined us this past meeting, and one will be joining us at our next meeting representing the pre-service. Go ahead. One of the things we needed to do was figure out how to focus on the evidence that is the preponderance of evidence that has been building over the last 20 years and have council-approved evidence-based resources that move from an argument about literacy and how to do the instruction into what does the evidence say. These were our anchor resources that would ground the discussion in our evidence pieces and give us agreed upon information through it that would be our basis. We used meta-analyses, beginning with the National Reading Panel from 2000, the IES practice guides. We use the Florida Center for Reading Research and the CIDAR Center for the U.S. Department of Special Education. And then the Agency of Education has been also using these resources, so we list them as a resource, as an area that we've been working on these pieces. We also try to make sure that we reflect what programs, because some of these pieces are about our instructional practices, some are about evidence-based programs, some are about evidence-based assessments. And so you'll see there's evidence for ESSA, Ed Reports, which helps us know which programs are aligned with standards and teacher usability. So there are a variety of resources there, but these are the ones that we anchor our conversations in. The council, as we've worked through those and as we've made decisions, we have agreed upon the resources. Now, there are many more that get proposed, but these are the ones that we've narrowed it down to agree upon and then anchor our evidence-based recommendations on. You can go ahead. We have a series of tasks that have been outlined in Act 28 and Act 139. The tasks remained the same. I was wondering if they were going to get updated in Act 139. They did not. They remained the same. And we've worked our way very quickly through them, and there are next steps to take. So the middle column reflects, yes, we have indeed touched on these pieces, and some have been completed. So the second task, where provide recommendations about updating statute 2903, that is something we made recommendations about, and the agency has been able to follow through, has been able to complete, and those updates are finished. What we will do as a next step in that particular example is support the implementation of that. So as the schools across the school systems across the state are working on this, our role as a council is to continue to support that implementation. You will see most of our tasks are in that advisory role. We are making recommendations, we are reviewing information, and we are monitoring results. That we are not really a working group, we really are an advisory group. So we take summary information, we narrow that down, and then we make our recommendations. Go ahead. So the recommendations we've made, and I just included a couple snips, and you can find them on the agency's website, where we have a council page, and you can read the reports that we've made. We in Act 28, we were required to do an annual report by December 15th to the General Assembly, State Board of Education, the Secretary of Education, and to the Agency of Education. The new Act 139 says that the report will go to the Agency of Education, to the Secretary, and the Secretary will work on carrying those pieces out. So a slight shift there, but you can see what our recommendations to date have been. We started with that premise of the language had sat with the struggling learner, and we moved that to all learners. It's really important for us, and we tried to expand that beyond grade 3. So we have a high priority on getting every student reading by grade 3. We also want every learner in every grade to be successful as a reader. So we added that piece, and we made sure that we kept the language of pre-K in there. We do have representation for the early learning years on the council, and it is important for us that we build the foundation before they even come to school. We started with aligning. We wanted to make sure that the language that sat in our requirements and in our recommendations aligned with our state and federal requirements. So making sure that that was aligned, that it was evidence-based, and previously it had said research-based. Our federal requirement is evidence-based, so we moved that up there. And that brings it to you've gone through the scientific process and research, and then what are the practices that are demonstrating the most effective or efficacy? That's what the evidence base shows us. So we also included Vermont multi-tiered systems of support. We have a federal requirement for multi-tiered systems of support, and we have state guidelines around that. We made specific recommendations regarding the blueprint around instructional practices, including evidence-based resources for instructional practices, creating an instructional guide for the state, asking about evidence-based assessment, making sure that we have both code and meaning. It's reflected in Act 139 with the language of code and comprehension. Both are critical in this piece, and making sure that we also embed that culturally responsive component, that every learner needs to see themselves in the work that we're doing and in the materials that they're using. We included opportunities for higher education so that we could focus on pre-service pieces, how to make sure that people know about the Big Five, the phonemic awareness, phonics, vocabulary, comprehension. I know I've just left one out, and that they're aware of what the evidence base that sits on that before they become one of our teachers in the state. And then when they do become one of our teachers in the state, Act 139 had said make sure that we have some professional development for those K-3 teachers. And then the last piece that we'd said is that was important is we need to make sure that there's funding available for this. There is a preponderance of evidence there. There is enormous work happening across the state, and we need to make sure that we have funding to support this work. I'm really proud of the work that we do. We would love to spend more time on adolescent literacy. It's an area that we know that our data is showing us some need as well. So we'd love to move past the K-3. Our law keeps us rooted in Act 139, keeps us rooted in the K-3 grade levels, and that will be the focus of our work. But as there are opportunities, we are advocating for all grades and all learners. All right, thank you so much, and let me know if there are any particular questions. Our meetings are public. There are 4 meetings a year. We just had our September meeting. Our next one is in early December. Our minutes and our agendas are posted on the agency website. And thank you so much for this time.
Thank you so much, Gwen. We really appreciate your dedication to this work and also guiding us through this and our partnership and really working together. Secretary Saunders.
Hey, good morning, everyone, and welcome. I'm Zoe Saunders, the Interim Secretary of Education. I want to thank Gwen for her service and extend my appreciation to the Literacy Advisory Council for sharing their expertise. Read Vermont is built upon the recommendations that Gwen shared and the research on how children learn to read. We understand that making the shift to the science of reading requires instructional changes that are challenging to implement. And the Agency of Education is here to support you. Improving literacy is a priority for the Agency of Education. We will continue to engage with the field in implementing this program because it requires a partnership. Later in the program, you will hear from Mill River Unified School District on how their schools have implemented the science of reading so that we can share those best practices. I want to thank everyone at the Agency of Education for their commitment to this work, and I will turn it over to Emily Lesh to get into more specifics on Read Vermont and how you can stay involved in this important project. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Secretary Saunders and Gwen. So Gwen, you really teed it up perfectly for our conversation here around what Read Vermont is. And so we've hit on earlier that Read Vermont is a statewide initiative dedicated to improving literacy outcomes for all Vermont students. And AOE's role is really to support and provide leadership and support around implementation. And so Read Vermont is our commitment to putting resources behind the vision and building our capacity to do the work as a state. But most importantly, we're really committed to listening and partnering and working collaboratively with all of you in the field and all of our partners. And so as Gwen noted, and has become evident, and literacy is a shared priority that's really supported by educators, families, caregivers, the General Assembly, and the Literacy Advisory the Literacy Advisory Council. There are really common needs and opportunities that have been identified that have informed Read Vermont as a comprehensive statewide initiative. And so our vision is really to ensure that children can read by the end of 3rd grade and graduate high school ready for college and career, and also supporting our adolescent readers throughout. So how we will do this is through leveraging and braiding multiple funding sources to focus on Read Vermont priorities, which we will get into in a few slides. But before we do that, I do want to move us into a bit of, we've been talking a lot this morning about the evidence and the research and the science of reading. So we just want to spend a few minutes clarifying what we mean by the science of reading. So there's a lot of information, and some of it is confusing, but what we really are grounding our work in is the body of research that's referred to as the science of reading. And so this body of research, referred to as the science of reading, has some really critical characteristics that are really important to be aware of, no matter what your vantage point is. So first of all, the research is convergent. And so convergent research is when a study has been replicated many times and produces the same outcomes. This body of convergent research is comprised of thousands of studies published in peer-reviewed journals. It's been conducted around the world across multiple languages. And it's also really important to note that this research began well over 50 years ago and has accumulated, and I think really critically, is ongoing. And so this research is continuing to evolve and to develop, and we're all learning as we're moving forward. So it also, I noted the convergent research. There are several different fields that the research comes from. And it's really important to understand that we're not talking about research specifically in one field, but it is really coming from across disciplines, including education, cognitive and developmental psychology, neuroscience, communications sciences, implementation sciences, as well as linguistics. So there isn't just one research field. One of the seminal pieces that is a representation of the science of reading, and also represents that this work is really, as Gwen noted, about language comprehension as well as word recognition, is Scarborough's reading rope. We're not going to dig into this deeply today, but we wanted to just quickly preview the reading rope as this seminal research, and it provides a great visual metaphor for the development of skills over time that are represented by the strands of the rope. All of these different strands work together to result in skilled reading. And these are skills that students can be taught, and all students can be taught. So skilled reading ultimately is represented on the right side by the tightening of the weave of these interlocking sets of skills and knowledge. And so the language comprehension and word recognition skills are both critical, or all critical. So now that we've talked about the characteristics of this body of convergent research, I really just want to quickly speak to what this research informs. And so it's really important to note that this research really gives us rich information about how to interpret and close the opportunity and achievement gaps for traditionally marginalized students, including students of color, children with disabilities, linguistically diverse children, and those children experiencing poverty. It also informs how skilled reading develops in the brain, and how explicit and systematic instruction supports the brain functions and structures that really result in fluent reading and reading comprehension. So we know a lot about the most effective instructional practices and routines for students, from those who are advanced readers to those that need additional support. And so the research really supports us in using a variety of tools, as well as screening, diagnostic and progress monitoring and assessments, and that can provide us with really rich data to guide instruction and also to help identify, prevent, and remediate reading difficulties. So I just wanted to provide a nod to what this research does. And so it is really important that we empower leaders and educators with information, and the information as this body of evidence continues to grow, about how they can strategically move forward and utilize assessments, curriculum in their classrooms and in school buildings day to day. So now I'm going to turn it over to Emily Loita, who is going to introduce our next guest.
Thank you. For many educators, this is a paradigm shift. So we're going to highlight one SU's experience. Deborah Gardner-Bosch is Mill Rivers Literacy and MTSS Coordinator. She participated in the Early Learning Networked Improvement Community for Literacy for several years. Through continuous improvement cycles and professional learning from lead experts in the field of literacy, Deborah led her SU through the process of adopting and implementing evidence-based literacy practices. We're fortunate to have her here to share a little bit about her story. Deborah.
Thank you. You can go ahead and start the slides there. So I wanted to start with making it clear that this was not just a couple year process, that we had some persistently low literacy scores in our district, particularly when we looked at grade 4 and up. And we sort of doubled down on initially back in 2017 on our implementation of guided reading, had some more trainings on that, really focused on implementation fidelity. And we were not moving forward. We began exploring in our PLC structure more about literacy practices, and we moved from using a 3 queuing system in 2019, and really we're trying to focus more on some of the research-based instructional practices. 2020 happened. Of course, we were just in survival mode, trying to figure out how to navigate the remote world. And in 2021, we saw the AOE's for schools to participate in a networked improvement community with Nell Duke. And Nell Duke's work had been one of the things that we had focused on in some of our initial shifts. So we were very excited to join that work. Next slide. So in 2021, we only had a couple classroom teachers who were involved. By 2022, we expanded. I'll talk a little bit about how our expansion really happened and ended up having all 4 of our elementary schools represented. Last year, we had an initial adoption of some new science of reading curriculum. It was a year of full implementation for some of our teachers, and really an exploration for some of our others who had not been involved in this work previously. We chose bookworms. This is something that Dr. Walpole and the University of Delaware have worked on over many years, and it has lesson plans in it for teachers, which was really a plus for us. And so this year we're working on full implementation and fidelity and sort of looking to the future of trying to sustain that work. Next. So as I say, our story sort of began with our own research and then the opportunity that Dr. Nell Duke, we were also really interested in the fact that it would connect our pre-K with our kindergarten and first grade teachers, because that wasn't something that we had had a lot of success with doing. Next. So the initial aims for this were that by the end of pre-K, that all of the students, really in all of the learners would be able to write the first sound in most words that were personally meaningful in a text for them. So when they were writing. And the kindergarten aim was that all children would be able to read and write any regular consonant, vowel, consonant word. This was something that our think was possible, but in this NIC that we had joined, all of teachers who had been doing it the years before in Nebraska, New Jersey, Maryland, had all met this aim. So go ahead. So we did end up at the end of that first year. I can't actually how that slide is not showing right for me. In the beginning of the year, we had 7% of our students being able to read and write CVC words, and had 92 at the end of the year. Next slide. Sharing that data with our other schools was really important, but I wanted to look and make sure that the teachers who had been involved in this just didn't have a fluke of a set of kids. So I went and looked at some of our beginning assessment data to compare. Did they come in already knowing more letters and sounds, and found that it was very comparable between the schools that had been involved in the NIC and not, but that our outcomes were very different. Only 14% of the students who hadn't been involved in this NIC were meeting these goals, and 83% were in the other schools. Next. So when I shared this data with schools, we had a big expansion so that we now had all schools participating and more of our intervention team. Yeah, you can go ahead. And we focused on being able to provide some materials, which was really important. We're able to get some print salient text sets in pre-K. And work on some codable sets for others, and also set up PLCs that happened all through that school year that were led by teachers who were in our NIC. We focused on the literacy essentials from Michigan's literacy.org. Next. We also did things like had grade release days, and we're able to come up with a schedule working with Dr. Walpole and Dr. Duke to sort of suggest to all our schools. Next. The PFA cycles that were in our PLCs followed the same thing we had done in the NIC. We had some guiding questions and, just a plan, do, study, act. But by having teachers bring to the PLCs a slide that was showing artifacts of what they had been exploring, we really thought that was an important piece of it, along with having it be teacher-led. Next. So those crucial components for us were district admin support. You needed to have a team facilitator who was a member of the admin team who was really advocating for this. Our teacher ambassadors were our absolute best way to move it forward. We did rely on the content expertise of literacy mentors and reading specialists we had in our schools, and we were able to really target our PD to stay focused on literacy and not do a scattershot of everything for those years. Next. So our takeaways here are that what we saw happen with the PDSA cycles was that the quality tier 1 instruction really improved to support all students. Next. Data and being able to look at our data was the most powerful motivator. That teachers that working together really was sort of contagious, because when some teachers were having a lot of success, it was contagious for others. And that system spread and scale really does take a lot of time and resources, and that coordinated curriculum, coordinated assessments, schedules, materials, PD, and time were vital. Next, so how did it work? What was our year one progress? So this was from last year, when it was just initially being done. We looked at our cohorts over time. So we had, if you look at our students who were meeting proficiencies in third grade, we went from that same cohort being at 17% in first grade, 1%. These were district scores. And fourth grade scores went from 20% to 49%. Next. And we also looked at our average percentile ranks for fall to winter, seeing that what I blocked out on the left, the names of the actual schools, but all of them increased, a change there in their average percentile rank. Next. So where we are now, this summer, we continued with PD for onboarding new teachers. We've had a lot of new teachers and a lot of new administrators in our district. We did use our August in-service time to support this work. We have 2 early release days. We just had the one in September. We'll have another one in January that will focus on this work. And the challenges and opportunities for us are, we have new principals, new teachers. We do or resistant teachers. We have schedules that are always a challenge. And we also implemented a pilot that Bookworms has for grades 6 to 8. And one of our challenges is also supporting that work. Anyway, that's pretty much what I had to share, and am always happy to answer questions or talk individually with those who may be interested later. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Deborah. We really appreciate you sharing your story, and also have learned so much in our partnership with you. And it really leads us right into the key priorities for Read Vermont and what Read Vermont is all about. So Read Vermont is really focused on 6 priorities, both at the local level as well as the state level. So this involves us and our work at the Agency of Education as well. And so through the common lessons learned and the themes that from the advisory council to the work on the ground that we've been observing and supporting in districts like Mill River, we recognize that there are resources and support that's needed to support the statewide implementation of evidence-based literacy instruction and assessment. And so we are really focused on supporting districts through professional learning and creating opportunities for educators in pre-kindergarten all the way through 12th grade to learn more about evidence-based literacy instruction. We're also very, very committed to and will be rolling out at the beginning of October opportunities for job-embedded coaching. And so a lot of what Deborah's story was talking about was job-embedded coaching and coaching that really supports classroom educators as well as school building leaders in putting research into practice. We also will be supporting a literacy learning network. And so I think, Deborah, you so well positioned the value and strong opportunity for educators and leaders to learn from one another and along with one another to problem solve together. And so we will be launching a literacy network that will connect literacy leaders and educators across the state or in your communities. So the details on the professional learning, the job embedded coaching, and the literacy learning network will be released on October 1st, not August, October 1st. And we'll look forward to engaging with all of you in the field around this work. But I can't move on without identifying the important work that is to be done at the state level as well. And so at the state level, we're really focused on capacity building internally within the Agency of Education. So we have a cross-functional team that is really supporting this work and are providing all hands on deck support. So this means close coordination across the education quality division with continuous improvement processes across the federal education programs or title programs, and of course with data and assessment teams. We also will be issuing a series of guidance documents and providing workshops and opportunities to dig into those guiding documents and resources around Act 139, but also more broadly around Read Vermont. And then finally, we know that family and caregiver engagement is critical to supporting our developing students. And so we are developing resources to support educators when engaging with families and caregivers. So how we are doing this in a way where we're braiding funds and thinking about sustainability over time and how we set this work up for success. So the work is really cross-cutting and bringing together a variety of resources, so funding resources, but also resources focused on providing technical support. So the top row are funds that we're putting into this effort, and you can see in the bottom, these are national subject matter experts that we are working with through a partnership with the Department of Education. And so we're really looking to identify additional state funding that we can, additional funding, federal funding that we can leverage to ensure sustainability of this effort. But we also know that sustainability will require funding, but also really critically aligning and leveraging the resources that we have in the most efficient and effective ways possible. So immediate next steps before we turn to questions. So stay tuned on August 1st for an announcement on expert support that will be supporting us in building local capacity. That will also be supporting us at the state level and as well as the family and caregiver capacity building level. On October 8th, we will hold a webinar where you can learn more in depth about Read Vermont, around the professional learning and coaching opportunities involved in that. And you can sign up now for the Read Vermont listserv, where you will receive emails about the latest happenings and any important announcements. So with that, I'm going to turn it to questions from the field and to see what we have. Emily Loita, are there some key themes from the chat that we should elevate and talk about here in our last 5 minutes?
There's a question about assessment and intervention flowcharts. These have been our benchmarking tools, but also for each instructional focus based on the Science of Reading Literacy Acquisition Staircase, has an instructional strategy tool and progress monitoring tool based on that focus area. Can this be asked of SUs so the teams can see what SUs have? So this person was asking for if SUs and SDs will be asked for their assessment intervention flowcharts. And then there's also a question about when they can expect to receive more specific information about how they'll be supported through the Act 139 implementation. And the final question that I noted was, how can we encourage the participation of Vermont's higher education institutions? So 3 pretty
Excellent.
different questions.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start at the top here. And so on the assessment and intervention flowcharts, as well as when folks will be receiving additional information about what is expected around assessments. So I will start off by saying that we are working very carefully to align Act 139 with existing efforts in the field. And so we are working really closely with the continuous improvement team and the data inventory teams to ensure that information around assessments will be incorporated into those existing processes. We will be releasing more specific guidance by November. And so we will be, we're really working to provide that. We will have some additional information about all of these pieces and get more into the weeds, so to say, on October 9th as well. Let's see, the last question, Emily, can you say that one? What was the last one again?
So there was a question about encouraging participation in Vermont's higher education institutions.
Yes. So, we are one of the tasks outlined in Act 139 is to provide that the AOE is to provide recommendations to the State Standards Board next year. And there is work underway with our team at the agency focused on educator prep programs to convene educator prep programs by the end of this year. And so we're working diligently to do that. We also, the Act 139 expanded the Literacy Advisory Council to include 2 members from institutions of higher education.
So there are 2 more questions, Emily. Now we've got 3 more questions. Should we continue with that?
Yeah, so
I can very quickly address the one, does this initiative include educators from disciplines other than ELA? So at the pre-K through 3 level, it's all hands on deck teaching kiddos how to read. And then as we get up into those adolescent grades, we will be having adolescent literacy specific programs and support that will include educators from all disciplines, because it's everyone's job and also helps all students learn content when they can read. So it's a reciprocal relationship. The next question was about whether the AOE whether we would be working with the AOE Family Engagement Network. And so just reiterating what Emily Lesh said about the intra-agency, cross-agency team that's going to be supporting this work. So we will be including folks from all over the agency in this work.
Excellent. So I'm looking at the time here, and I just want to make sure that you all know that we are committed to answering the questions in the chat that we have not gotten to. And through a document that we will send out to everyone that has registered for this webinar, as well as all of those that are on the Coffee and Conversations list. And so you will receive a recorded version of this webinar if you have registered for it. We also will post this on the AOE website as well. I also just want to quickly wrap up and give a nod here to the AOE operations team and thank them for allowing us to utilize and leverage this Coffee and Conversations time. And if you are interested in being added to the list for future Coffee and Conversations, please email Courtney or Taylor. And the next Coffee and Conversations will be October 19th. So we will not have a Coffee and Conversations on October 9th. So with that, I just wanted to thank everyone for your support and being here today. And we are just so thrilled to launch all of this work with you and in a very collaborative way that is supporting you and meeting everyone where they are in service of our students and our educators. So thank you so much, and please do not hesitate to reach out with additional questions. Excellent. Thank you all. So I will say, I see that is October 19th correct? So October 8th is the next date for learning more specifically about the local capacity building, as well as some critical elements of Act 139 and getting that more under the hood detailed look at Read Vermont. And October 19th is the next in this series for Coffee and Conversations, which is a time when education leaders regularly come together. And we will be sure to clarify that. All right, thanks everyone.